Guys, I want to take a moment and welcome two of my friends to the stage with me. You might not know who they are. Before I do that, I just want to share unless your head is buried in the sand and you're just not paying attention to anything in life, our nation has always had certain birth pangs and certain pains. As a matter of fact, while there are a lot of great things to celebrate about our nation, there's a lot of great things to celebrate it now. There's a lot of great things to celebrate even in its initial founding. I don't think that I'm being too critical to say that America's initial sin would have been the sin of slavery. And because of that, over generations, there's been an accumulative effect that has created certain inequities, prejudices, and racism that is evident in our culture that we as a church are called to eradicate. It is our job to show the world the kingdom of God. And in the kingdom of God, let me explain something to all of you. I want to start offending your sensibilities now. So if you're new to Destination Church and you're watching this video, I want to go ahead and warn you. At some point in time today, I'm probably going to offend you. No matter if you're a lefty, a righty, blackie, or whitey, it doesn't matter. I'm going to probably offend you. And so the reason is because until things in our life that are blind spots get challenged or offended and brought to light, we don't change. And I hear people say this type of stuff. I hear people say, well, I'm colorblind. That's impossible. It's not even accurate. No one's colorblind. So you can stop that with me right now, okay? In the kingdom of God, God made us different when it comes to certain things because he enjoys us that way. But in Jesus, we're all one people. We're all one family. In the kingdom of God, there's only one race, a kingdom race. But the fact is, we're still living in a natural world where some people want to uphold different divisions and cycles that I believe are disruptive and destructive. And the kingdom of God is called to bring us together, unite, and to tear down forces of the enemy. And so I don't want you to hear from me today. I brought a few of my friends with me, and we're really going to have a discussion probably the same way we would at my house, eating together. And we're going to let you in on a little bit of our discussion and a little bit of what we're talking about. And I'm just praying that today is a blessing to all of you. And I pray right now also that the mercy and grace of God would not only be upon what we say, but be upon how what we say is heard. Because we want you to hear our hearts. I want you to know that I know both of these men, and they know me. Our heart is for unity, and our heart is to destroy the evil in this world and to show the love of God. Because all of us up here, we love all people. And we want to do what we can to show the world what the kingdom looks like instead of what the world wants to say we are. All right? So with that being said, we're going to get started. I want to introduce you first to my right. Some of you know this gentleman. Some of you don't. He pastors City of Hope Church. And if you're watching this from City of Hope, you probably should be on your live stream. You better be. If not, then go back and watch it again later and make sure that you're sowing where you're supposed to. But if you like to sow a lot, then you could just sow extra for your pastor. To me, it works. Just pastor appreciation. All that's good. Pastor Justin Brown. And I'm very strategic even in who I invite because I not only value him as a person, I value what he brings to the table when it comes to this discussion. Okay, so you'll be hearing from him in just a moment. And also, to this side, my left, your right, is someone that we've been friends an awful long time, a real long time. We've been friends. We probably met when, how old was we? I was probably maybe 13 or 14. And his mom is actually, I know you're watching, I don't even call her anything else but moms because she was like my second mom. And matter of fact, in the summertime, back in the day before I wore any kind of sunblock and had my hair shaved, she'd tell people I was one of her sons. We've been friends that long, and we're close like that. And this is, if you don't know, I'm very proud to call him now Dr. real doctorate, like a real doctorate. See, his shirt says melanated and educated. Dr. Jason Ottley, he serves currently at the American University, and we're going to get it today. So, guys, honor them and know that these guys, these are heavyweights. They're not just Joe so-and-so saying what they want to say. These are guys that God has anointed them as well for such a time as this. So, but while we're going to get into it right now, thank you. No, I don't need my phone. So, is that working good? You good, bro?
Hello.
Oh, okay. We're good.
Good morning, everybody. Hello.
Yeah, I'm good.
Man,
I'm good.
man, yeah. That's
Bless
awesome.
y'all. Bless you all.
So, I want to start. I'm going to actually ask both of you this same question to respond. Pastor Brown, I'd like for you to respond to this first. Given the recent mess with coronavirus and then the slaying of Ahmaud Arbery, what was your initial reaction when you saw the video of what happened with George Floyd? Like, how did those around you? How did you react to it? What was your how did seeing that? What did that make you feel?
I think for me, and I've said this a couple times on social media, it was the trifecta. I'm sorry. It was the trifecta of Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Ahmaud Arbery, which kind of got wiped off the storyline, and then George Floyd. I guess the moment when George Floyd said, called out to his mother.
Oh, bro.
And she had already passed. I don't know if it struck a nerve. To me, that was the moment that I guess crystallized this whole systemic issue we've had for a long time. And when my kids are watching.
How did they respond to it, bro? Like
my oldest one looks at me and kind of gives me that look like what's going on.
Uh-huh.
My younger son's he's still growing, so he kind of gets it, but doesn't. But when my older son kind of looks at me and is like why did that happen? And it hit me like a bag of bricks. And for me, I had to go sit in my room by myself to begin to pray, meditate, and think about how to respond to this. First, as a husband, father, and then pastor, leader in community. And I'm an educator having this conversation with my students as well. I think that's the moment it crystallized that we now have to move past this outskirts, kind of stay on the outer court. Mm-hmm. Like we now have to start having these real conversations, uncomfortable conversations that lead to policy changes. Because this happens, it's happened. We've had these meetings. We'll have church services together. Everybody will feel good for about 2 months. Mm-hmm. Then a year later, another one happens. We'll come back, feel bad for about a week. But this one felt different. Mm-hmm. I had people that they don't give their opinions on stuff like this, but when they're reaching out saying they're bothered, they're struggling with how to look at this, and that's when it kind of cemented the fact that we're at a different moment in time when it comes to, and this is not just about policing systems, about the moment of racism right now, because a lot of us probably thought this is something from the past generation. We're growing up post-racial. We elected President Obama. We got to be post-racial. And this smacks everybody in the face that, no, we're not there yet. It's still an issue that has to be dealt with.
What did you say to your family? Or how did you address it with your sons?
And here's the hard part for me. Where we live, there's not a lot of African-American boys his age. So all his good friends, and which I love because they don't see color, and somehow down the road they'll see it, they just go play because they enjoy each other. Yeah. And I'm at that moment that, well, do I have to have this rough conversation with him now so he has to look at his friends differently? I'm sorry. He has to see his friends differently. But I had this conversation that there's still a real issue out here in the outside, your local community, that there's still a problem with some people in the way they see skin color. And that kind of opened up his eyes, and we've had conversations since then. But I try not to bombard him yet, try to slow walk him through that this is still life, this is still a struggle that people must fight. black, brown, male, female. And that's where we've had this, that's kind of where our conversations have teetered, and I've kind of stayed right there and shown him, what's going on. Because, I'll tell this story, and we'll probably talk later. One of my best friends, African-American black cop in D.C., Northeast, Darren Malloy, been there 20 years, and he's moved up, is now a detective. And so we could talk about both sides because he's seen the other side. Mm-hmm. So for me and the church, I'm kind of filling that gap. The church has to be that balm in Gilead to heal those breaks, but it's a big break. Mm-hmm. So it's not going to happen overnight.
So I want to ask you one more question because I think it's important. Because it's important for us to understand that a lot of times people want to use what they perceive to be facts for certain arguments, but sometimes facts don't represent someone else's truth. Mm-hmm. And so my one question I'll have for you in regards to truth is, growing up raising, and I know it might be different for us here, say more in the country, but growing up raising sons, have you ever as a parent had anxiety or fear for your own children?
Yes, I have. Particularly my older one. I love him to death. He's just like his daddy. He's got a little temper on him. And I'm trying to teach him that you got to be able to handle some stuff internally and not act out, because once you leave the comfort of my home, I know God can cover you everywhere, but once you leave the comfort of the brown hedge, and you react a certain way, you don't know what the response is going to be. And I pray there's not, but all it takes, again, is one time you respond a certain way or you look a certain way, it could be the end that fast. So I've started, and it kind of started back with Eric Garner and a couple of, Mike Brown, and he's kind of seeing like, what's going on? Why is this happening? So I started having those conversations, but for me, as it's getting close to be 14, 15, 4 years from getting out of my house, and I can't check on him 24 hours a day, I want to know that I've prepared him, watch this, for a real world outside of the brown house.
Amen. I'm sorry. No, it's good. That's a better. I'm giving you the better mic.
Oh,
that was the more. That's the more.
That's what I'm talking about, sir.
I want to say this as well. I feel that. I think sometimes what gets lost in this is that the effect on parents and that notion of fear and anxiety. And what happens is, and I'm going to pass this over to Dr. Ottley to answer the same question, but what I need people to understand is that we can show stats, and I know some sides of political arguments show stats to back up how there's not certain issues. But one, stats don't always trump experience. But the other thing is there is a inequity at times as to the response that people who look different receive from even doing the exact same crime as somebody else. Yeah. We'll get to that more later. But Dr. Ottley, tell me how you felt when you saw everything. Yeah, what was going through your mind?
Let me just say this first. A man of God for sure. That's number one. But I wear a race scholar hat. So I want to talk about some of the quantitative as well as the qualitative research that is out there, because you need both. That's right. Pastor Coley, you're right. We look at numbers so much, but anecdotally, we need to look at the lived experiences of individuals who have gone through this. And so what I felt initially was infuriated, but then simply started to channel that frustration into motivation. And I'll tell you why I was infuriated, because this is not the first time we've seen this, right? Racism hasn't necessarily increased, it's just being filmed.
Yeah, absolutely. People got cameras now.
Yeah, so the infuriation comes because of the exposure now of how we have been broadcasted in the face of this society. And I was just tired of having the same narrative of we keep going through this cycle. At what point are we going to start doing something about the cycle that we go through? because seemingly something else will happen in the world, and then it will take its place, and then we'll focus on that for a few months, and then we'll focus on something else for a few months, right? So, the motivation for me was to create an opportunity, and you were part of this webinar series last week. We had you on as a spiritual leader to talk about what things we can do different. I get my students who are emailing me, calling me, texting me, Professor, what can I do? How can I be on the front line? Can you encourage me? And not just white students, but my black students as well. I teach in a predominantly white institution. And the reason I went back to get my PhD was because less than 1% of African-American men have a PhD. And I had to think about, well, if less than 1% of people who look like me are teaching classes about race, right, and they've never lived through this thing, I need to be able to provide a narrative and a context that would help them understand. And so, I did that for not only my community, but all the other folks who were wanting to bring about change. So that's the motivation to teach, the motivation to educate, the motivation to create frontline movements in a very strategic way that does not allow us to be back here 20, 30, 40 years from now.
I think one thing you said is key. This is not something that just happened.
No.
It's been, stuff like this has been happening. And the reason I mentioned stats is people will say, well, this type of stuff happens to everybody of every color. But this is what people fail to realize. It doesn't happen because.
Yeah.
See, there's a difference.
Yeah.
It's not about the numbers you can show me of, this amount of violence, or this happens to white people, this happens to, let me give you a perfect illustration. So I'm sure you probably heard the statistic for every 10,000 violent crimes, the average of it being dealt with is, over the last few years, is 5 white people shot by or killed by police versus 4 black people. So I see these statistics. We're talking about violent crime in that statistic. What I saw didn't need context. What I saw was someone, no matter what happened in his life before this video everyone's talking about now, no matter what happened, I don't care what he did, I don't care what he took, I don't care if he was high, I don't care any of that. There is no justification in the United States of America when the equal, which there is no equal, but if there was an equal constitutional availability for everybody, which when the Constitution was written, black people weren't even a whole person. So I don't have time to go there. I'm a constitutionalist as long as it applies fairly to everybody. Everybody. What I've found is the problem is very systemic in that there's a discrepancy of what it means to be equal, right? So this is what people get all upset. Well, there's more people of this color, that color killed for violent crime. Okay, I feel you, but we're not talking about violent crime. How many white people, or for that matter, Latino people or Asian people, are judged, juried, and executed on the street over something that the punishment don't fit the crime? And so this is the discrepancy that many people are missing. And so I believe God is really giving me a voice for both sides, because when it comes to because here's the sad truth is that we've as a nation allowed this entire argument to be, this narrative to be controlled by one side or another of a political force. So while we need to use politics and government and things to help rectify old evil, really the hearts of men being altered and changed by the presence of Jesus is the best way to really start bringing change. But the only way to change the system is to infect it. Because I've heard people say, and you can disagree with me later, you can disagree with me later, that the system's broken. And I don't think the system's broken. I think it's working the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, the system wasn't created for us.
You weren't even invited to the table when it was written.
It wasn't created. There was a force 400 years ago to be in this country, right? To forcibly bring another race who was fined where they were. You forced that 400 years ago. If you think about the Native Americans who were already here, And you wonder, well, why weren't the Native Americans who were the present day blacks, why weren't they the ones who were enslaved for 400 years? Well, if you look at all the history, it shows there was smallpox and there was all these other diseases that white people could not fight off, right? And so the Native Americans knew the land better than anybody else, and so they were able to get away, and so they forcibly brought over blacks, right? And so fast forward, you look at systemic racism, right? And so the idea of projects or the ghetto was a social experiment that was created to place class, to divide class between people. We couldn't continue to divide race constitutionally, but we could divide class, right? And so you put all the blacks in the ghetto, all the blacks in the hood, the social experiment, but then you have to look at, well, why is it in the black community, people who are numbers, white conservatives ask me all the time, well, there's more black on black crime than there is white on black crime. Why is that? Well, the social experiment. You placed us in the hood, and you forced us to live on less than the minimum wage, and you force us to compete with one another time and time and time again, right? That the systemic racism has created this opportunity for blacks to continue to compete with one another, right? And so if it's not made more equitable, give us opportunities for better jobs. Give us opportunities to bring our families out the hood. Give us opportunities to put our kids in the same colleges that other people get to put their kids into, right? We need more of those opportunities. But systemic racism has created a way for black people to always stay at the bottom.
Yeah, and I think something that you said is key, and I've been saying this for years. So hopefully all those watching us have some hard conversations understand this is not something new from the pulpit of Destination. This isn't a fly-by-night, we're jumping on the trend type of thing. We've been screaming this for years. I would say, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, I have been inundated my whole life with people that look differently than me. I come up in a multiracial family. I grew up in a post-racial family. So I have an advantage because a lot of racism is transferred, not just through teaching. Because some sin is genetic. The Bible says that some sin passes generationally. There are some people, because of what's been in their ancestry, they're predisposed to think a certain way or to feel a certain way or fight a certain demon. Some of the demons that we're fighting are our granddaddy's demons. See what I'm saying? This stuff passes. So some people have systematic feelings of racism and injustice. They don't even know where it came from. And the thing that really, really scares me is that growing up and being around a lot of black people, and also I want to say this is the term that we're all using. I know different people have different terms. Different generations get offended. Some want you to say African American, some want you. Just so you know, we understand that. We're just talking like we would in our house. Just so anyone, send me the letters, I'm going to get them anyway. But I'm going to say this. I think the majority of people that I've spoke to about this and really been in their life, because this is the thing, man. We got too many people that want to be in someone's argument but not in their world. Like, I'm not just sitting with you on a stage for a photo op. Me and Pastor G talked to over about 11 o'clock last night. The praise and worship leader that a lot of you just seen, right? He was at my table last night, all night. We do life together, right? This is family. I don't even get on the church thing because I'm tired of these people that want to say they want to have a multiracial church. It's the same as government or anything else. You want to have a photo op, right? Don't tell me you want a mixed congregation, a multiracial congregation, but everyone that makes decisions in your church on your board looks like you. You ain't afraid to let someone play a keyboard, but you won't let them make a decision. That's a topic for another day. But I'm going to say this. I've not heard black people at all in my life say they wanted to be treated better than, say, white people. I've never heard that. They want to be treated equal. I want to be treated the same.
I was going to jump in there. I was like, it shouldn't be too much to ask to just get to equal. I would just think that we're born with the idea, can I just get equal? And the fact that we have to beg to just get equality is part of the bigger issue.
Can I get pulled over? Like when you get pulled over, right? When you get pulled over, then whether it's truth by numbers or not is not the point. It's your truth.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. I can tell you some stories. I have been pulled over, had situations where I was afraid. And there were times where, but the majority of the time, if I leave Destination Church today and I get pulled over for speeding, I'm not concerned. Well, unless Pastor Crystal got warrants because she didn't pay her parking ticket.
What in the world?
But anyway, that's a topic for another day. That's a marriage conference. But I'm going to say this. I don't have the same level of anxiety that you would have to have simply because of what you've seen in your experience. And this is an inequity that a lot of people are failing to realize exists. Can you talk about that for a second? Let's get into the ugly stuff for a second. Let's talk about not only systemic racism. Can we all three have a little discussion about what is really privilege? Because people, like seriously, white people especially get real offended. No. Because a lot of people throw this word privilege around, and I would say it's not just white privilege, it's economic privilege. Yeah. That's a topic for another day.
So I'm going to let Dr. Ottley go second so I can get out, because he's the professor on this, so my answer don't look bad. Okay. But it's funny, first, talking about the police pullover, I was having a conversation with, what I consider a strong middle class black couple who are doing major things in the area. They know people know them. If I say their names, white, black, brown, you're going, they are good people. And you would be so surprised that even if they work in the government system that know people, how many times they said they've still been pulled over and they still feel nervous every time they get pulled over, even though they know people in the network, and that it's still a struggle for them. That's the elder generation. And then now speaking into the next point about white privilege, last week I spoke from Storer College in Harpers Ferry. Long story short, last Saturday night I was trying to preach and I just couldn't get it out. We're trying to respond to the whole George Floyd and, I can't breathe, and I just couldn't get my words together. It wouldn't flow. I stayed at church for 5 hours. My wife was, she's the videographer. I said, babe, I got to go home and pray and sleep on this some more. And the Lord sent me to Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, about 10:30 at night, and I drove past Storer College, the old HBCU that since has been abandoned, but the founding of the Niagara movement, the NAACP, has its roots in Storer College, right in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. So we went around, long story short, we found a shot. We wanted to shoot from here because we wanted to hit the historic moment. I'm preaching, it's me and my wife, nobody's there. They got yellow tape up. I don't even know if we're supposed to be there. Thank you, Lord. We're there, and I'm preaching. And I preached Can I Breathe last week, Acts 2, talking about the day of Pentecost. And it's just me and my wife. And about 10 minutes in, off to the side, comes a white gentleman with his dog. And I can't break camera because I'm looking at the camera. And I'm like, oh, Lord, is it about to go down? Because, I'm going down. I'm going through Dred Scott. I'm going through Civil War. I'm going through Plessy v. Ferguson. I'm going through black codes. I'm going for broke. And I'm wondering if this guy coming with this dog, how is he getting ready to respond to me? Is he going to confront me while I'm preaching out of the Bible about what I am saying? So he comes and stands behind us. My wife turns around. I'm trying not to break screen. And he stands there for about 5 minutes. So I'm like, is he calling the homeboys? Is it about to go down today? Like, Lord, you got to cover me in this one. He leaves, comes back by himself. I finish up the sermon, and as we're packing up, he comes and says, man, you're a very charismatic preacher. And I'm like, okay. And then he says this, it broke me. He says, you had me in tears today because you were speaking to this issue. And I didn't even talk about white privilege. He says this issue of white privilege, he brought it up to me. And we end up having a conversation. And he says he was scared to have this conversation with his family members because he didn't understand it. But he says from what we were talking about, and all I talked about was on the day of Pentecost, the Spirit fell when everybody, 15 different nations, all got on one accord. And my argument was simply that we won't get on one accord as a nation until we all speak the same language, but God can't fall to do that until we all get on the same page and are unified. And my bigger point was that we're all speaking in different languages. And when we're talking about white privilege, some people just automatically put their fingers in the ear because they're like, I don't have white privilege. How can I have it? And I'm not knocking anybody. And I'll say this, I'm a bridge builder. I always say the Klansman just don't like me yet because he haven't had a talk with him. If he gets to know me, he won't be racist. Now I step back from that. But that was my premise for a long time. But now dealing in reality that there are some things that you're born into that give you certain grace. Yeah. All right. And when I always say this, I'm not saying somebody asked for this privilege, all right, but it's kind of ingrained in the history, the systemic problem that certain breaks that people get because they're majority. And it's all right to have this conversation because as he's a school person, that the new conversation in school is how do we deem equity for everybody? How do we even talk about white privilege? And people will go, oh my God, they're talking about this race stuff again. Yes, we have to talk about it because it's still dangling fruit over the situations that we are in. So to make a long story short, that is a part of the conversation that has to happen and can happen.
That's good. You know, the white privilege, I think, is defined by so many different people, so many different ways, exactly. Right? Yeah. And I think about just what you were talking about, the ability to have access to something, yep. And not just those who are born in affluent neighborhoods, those who are born in rural neighborhoods, those who are born poor, or those who are born rich. It's just being white, you have access to some things that maybe folks of color don't, right? And so let's just look at walking into a retail store. My brothers and I have told stories many times before, walking into a retail store and there's security guards in there, they always seem to follow us around. Right? I don't care if you white and you rich, you white and you poor, your ability to access the retail store without getting followed inside the store is much different than my ability to do that, right? And so for those people who say I don't necessarily have white privilege just because I'm white, you have access to things necessarily that folks of color don't have access to. Right. And so, I think about this retail stores. I think about even education. We talk about, well, those people who are able to get into, college. If everybody goes to high school, gets a high school diploma, then they can go to college. Not true. Right. Because now we have to look at SAT and ACT testing. Well, white people have to take those too. Yeah, but look at the research. The white folks who do really well in ACT and SAT tests, they take those Kaplan courses. They can go to a class and get the tips on how to beat the test. Black folks can't afford to pay for those classes, afford to go to these centers and learn these tips and strategies. And so it's not equal at that point, right? So you say that there are measures that allow us to be equal, but if there is a race that has access to things that other races don't have access to, it doesn't make it equal. That's what privilege is.
Well, and I think you said something very interesting as well. You said, and I like that, you said that it's not as much white privilege, it's access. Mm-hmm. And I would say what a lot of people fail to realize, because I don't get offended by that term. I know a lot of people get offended. Mm-hmm. I try to live in two worlds. Mm-hmm. And not just racially, but, also politically, because I want to hear what each side's really saying. And so I have something that the Lord really shared with me that I want to share with a lot of those not only here today, but those watching, that you have to be careful on either side of the political aisle. Like I said earlier, when race becomes simply political, you label people and fail to understand what's really going on. Let me give you an example. Whether or not you want to believe this or not, you don't have to believe it. The majority of people, I've met very few people in my life that are overt racist. And I think that most people don't mind an overt racist because at least I know where you stand. It's the systematic situation that's the real problem. But here's the issue. The majority, I'll tell you what comes in a frustration, what's creating all this tension, is there's this narrative on both sides, for example, that if you support Trump, you're labeled a racist, right? I'm going to tell you why, not only that, are there people that support Trump that are racist? Yeah. But I can tell you what, there were people that support Joe Biden that's racist too. And they're racist a different way. But here's the issue. People fail to realize that the reason there's a large percentage of people that can support a Donald Trump, they don't realize that one of the reasons that people can do that is because of privilege. And you need to hear me out on this. The reason, and this is one of the biggest examples of privilege or access, however you want to call it, that I will give people, because I need our people watching this to understand. There's too much fighting and bickering going on the internet. People are losing friends. If you like so-and-so, I'm defriending you, lose my situation now, and all this nonsense because you're all charged. But here's the interesting thing. The reason so many people can be, for example, Christian, and I'm not going to say evangelical because I hate that people have hijacked that word to mean something it's not. But the reason so many people can be Christians and support someone like Donald Trump is because they're not racist. And here's the thing. Because they've been privileged enough to live a life where they can view politics without race being involved. So their experience is one where they can view politics and really be mad about an economy that they feel isn't working for them. Like for example, let me give you a perfect example. And I don't want to go into heavy politics, but let me tell you one of the real reasons why someone like Donald Trump got elected, right? You don't have to agree with me. I'm just telling you why. It wasn't just that, first off, during the election cycle, I didn't hear him say many things about, that I would consider racist toward black people, but he made those statements about, especially about Hispanics. That resonated with a certain group of people, for example, mostly white, blue-collar type people, that Rust Belt, let's just say it that way. So many of our jobs were going overseas and our manufacturing and all that stuff. So when you have a guy come and say, oh, we're going to make the country great again, we're going to deal with China, and we're going to deal with Mexico, and we're going to build a wall and all this kind of stuff, right? So many people hear that through a racial lens. There's a certain element of white people that because of privilege, they heard, watch this, my money's been being affected. I got someone going to fight for me. He's going to drain the swamp. He's going to fix things. And they got all irate over how they felt the last 4 years. What they fail to realize is black people have always felt that way. They've always felt like the system was against them and people were taking their work and people wasn't giving them an opportunity. It's the way they've always felt. And so there was a backlash in that feeling, and I would just encourage people who are quick to label someone that thinks different than you, don't just label someone a racist because of who you think they support or not. You cannot tell me that some people are privileged, but there's an element of their privilege that allows them to see life a certain way, and you don't see that. It's a blind spot. So what we have to do, instead of demonizing each other, is really get to the heart of the matter that when it comes down to race, for example, this should, I know it is, and I can't change it because I'm not Jesus. This shouldn't be, what I saw in a video should have nothing to do with politics. This is a man, period, that was snuffed out in a way he shouldn't have been, and we should all be irate over that.
Can I jump
Yeah, go ahead.
And probably why blacks are sensitive about this, and before I even get to President Trump, is that even since the late 90s, we've seen it on tape in film, and it seems like nothing changes. And for me, it's always the root-fruit problem. Like, we see the fruit, the protest, but there's a root issue that a lot of blacks see as stuff still hasn't changed. The older generations, they're saying they like President Obama because they finally had a chance, but it's almost like this is the same stuff we saw back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, and nothing really has changed. So, and I pray for the president. That's in God's hands. Who wins these elections? I stay out of that. We vote. But President Trump's the president. I vote for him because I don't need him to mess nothing up while I'm still alive. So I vote for, not vote for. I pray for the president, all right, that he gets people around him that can talk good sense into his ear, even though I don't agree with a lot of his stances, and that's okay, I can do that.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, when we call them dog whistles, when he says certain things that can be left up into interpretation, we're coming from a sensitive spot where we've seen this before. There's no other way that a lot of blacks can receive what he's saying. Absolutely. And I don't want to get political, but just as a person, this is what bugs us. As you talked about the Charlottesville, when they had the torches and they marched, and he says there were with good people on both sides. And for me, it's like, oh, really? I didn't know there was a good side of racism. And that's my point. Like racism. There's a difference between racism and injustice.
Absolutely.
Racism says, I don't like you because of your skin tone. It just, I make a snap. I don't like you because you're purple. I don't like you because you're polka dot. I don't know if I can do a lot about racism besides praying, all right? But the injustice that comes from the racism is the biggest issue. The lack of justice that we get in response because of skin tone is the bigger issue. And I want to separate the two, that there is a racism problem. I don't know if I can help them, but how you treat me as a citizen based on my color is a law problem. It is a legislation problem. So as we were speaking about earlier, we need to be able to talk about legislation and laws that protect us from injustice. And to me, I think that's one of the bigger and larger issues, no matter how you feel about President Trump, because we have conservative friends and liberal friends, and most conservatives are going to support whoever the Republican nominee is. But there are certain aspects about President Trump that I think you're a good person, you can call out. I don't care who you vote for, but you should be able, any president, that is certain stuff that is wrong, as my dad said all the time, it's right to do right, it's wrong to do wrong. You should be able to call wrong out when you see it.
So let me ask you a question about that real quick.
I was going to jump on before just the political piece, but before that, I think I want to just talk about the elephant that's in the room, right?
Yeah.
That's why do we keep talking about this white-black binary, right? Because there's so many other non-minority races, right, in our America. Yes, but we spend so much time on the white-black binary, and people are wondering, well, when do we move past the white-black binary? This is not slavery any longer, so why can't we just move on beyond that? But if we look past at the last 100 years, right, just think about the James Baldwin days, right, and the schools that were created through Frederick Douglass, right, and the Harlem Renaissance, the Civil Rights Movement, the Malcolm X's of the world, the Martin Luther King Jr.'s of the world, right? And so we have continually been fighting this white-black binary for hundreds of years. And we continue to fight this white-black binary. So the elephant in the room is, why do we keep talking about it? Because we continue to have to face generation after generation this binary. And we're teaching our kids, this Generation Z, right? We're teaching them to be colorblind. Just don't see color, right? I want you to see me. I want you to see I'm black. I got, I got tattoos, and, I got a funky hairstyle, and, right, I'm bravado when I speak and very confident, and I got swag. I need you to see the intersectionality of my race, right, of my color, because that's what makes me me. You being colorblind, you only see the profession. You don't see the man that God created. I need you to see color because he created me to be black for a reason. There was something in his mind when he created me to be black. And if you don't see black, then you're missing out on why he even created me, right? So we can't keep pushing the agenda to our children to be colorblind. I think there is a conversation of we are one human race, and how does God see us? He sees us as one human race. How do we see ourselves, though, right, is what has caused the dichotomy and all the frustration and strife that we continue to face. So until we get this black-white binary thing fixed, then the room for the other races at the table who are wondering, well, what about us, right? Well, let's get this fixed because we can't bypass blacks who have faced this injustices for over 400 years, and we fixing all these other minorities out here. Once we get this fixed here, it'll be fixed for all of us.
Can I speak to your vision?
Go ahead.
So, because I talk, we've talked over the years, and I know Pastor Coley's vision and mission, and I give kudos to my destination to how you're trying to live out this kingdom mandate. But I also like to go back a little to my school stuff. I don't talk too much about this, but there is a context in the Bible where Jesus does talk about specific cultures. Hear me. He talks about Samaritans. He talks about Gentiles. He talks about women. And watch this. He talks about lepers. He talks about them in their specific context. And this kind of goes back to the all lives matter versus black lives matter. Yes, we do know all lives do matter, but everybody has a specific context in which they live their humanity. And Jesus was very purposeful in how he spoke specifically to certain groups because of what was being done against them. So and I want to kind of give kudos to this, that you can say Black Lives Matter and not exempt everybody else, because blacks have a specific issue. When we get to the brown lives, you say it's not binary. Brown lives have a specific set of circumstances they are dealing with. Women have a certain set of circumstances that they are dealing with. And Jesus, that's why I love him being a liberator, always spoke to them in their context. Lord knows we want everybody to be saved, but Jesus went beyond that and spoke to them at their level of struggle. He spoke to them in their context. When people come to hear Pastor Coley, they're bringing a context in. They're broke. They lost the job. The marriage is on the rocks. They're trying to figure out, I'm trying to figure out, can I even be in a church like this? He's trying to build the United Nations church out here. I might not want to be in United Nations church. So are we even hearing what the preacher is saying? Because Jesus spoke to specific, Jesus was a minority, y'all, in a majority empire. Okay, I didn't want to go here on today. Pastor, I love him, and you should still love him too, but I'm going to talk about this. Jesus was a Jew in a Roman Empire. He was a minority that fought against the oppression of the Roman Empire, all right? And that's what got him killed. It wasn't because he healed. It wasn't because he set free and delivered. No, he was changing the system. He was a liberator, and they said, that boy down there is causing too much trouble, y'all. Y'all, Pilate, you go ahead and take care of him because he's trying to bring too much change. And for me, you got to put some respect back on the name Jesus, because Jesus was a change agent. Thank you, Pastor Coley, for being willing to have this conversation. But Jesus was the ultimate change. He was the ultimate liberation theologist. In African-American settings, we call it liberation theology, that he was a liberator trying to free people from bondage of oppressive systems. So I just want to throw that out there on today, speaking in this issue, that Jesus, he can speak to all these different set of the immigrant issue, the Black Lives Matter issues. He can speak to all of them at the same time and still be individually involved in all of them.
Well, I'm glad someone brought up Jesus this morning. So,
don't worry. Mine is the church and race and relationship. So that's kind of my wheelhouse.
I think the thing is that, let's talk about that for a minute. Let's get into church for a minute and what our role is, because I can't tell you the amount of people that's come to me with, I don't want to go here yet, but like because you unpacked a lot of things with that. But let me say this. You said something earlier that's key. It's something my church will tell you. I preached for years, that in the day of Pentecost, when the Spirit fell, they all heard in their own language. So it is required of me as a man of God to feel what my people feel. Right? It's disingenuous for me to be a leader and say I have someone on say Pastor G. I might not agree with everything that maybe he thinks, agrees. I don't have his experience. But it's disingenuous for me to have people that I lead that I don't stop to hear. And this is a problem I've seen in the church, is we don't stop to hear each other. We don't stop to learn from each other. Yeah, listen, no one is sitting here saying that, because I've been getting these emails, and I need you to hear me. Anything I'm saying or doing in this time, trying to fight this, I need people to understand I'm not saying that people should feel guilty about how they were born or that their life don't matter. That's not what I'm saying. Jesus said that who among you having 99 and lose one won't leave the 99 to find the one, right? He didn't say all sheep matter. He said the one that's lost right now matters. And that's why we say what we say. When people are saying Black Lives Matter, they're simply saying, now here's the problem with everything is everyone wants to politicize it. And they say there's elements to the political side of that, the political agenda we don't agree with. So now we're politicizing something that really, this should not even be a completely political issue. It should be a flat out rights and equality issue, in my opinion. Like to me, when I see someone, I understand, I celebrate people's difference. If it wasn't for different people, I wouldn't even be here. I'm a Coley. Do the etymology of that name and find out where I came from. The fact is, I celebrate our differences. But I also understand that we're one in Jesus Christ, that he loves us all the same. And the fact is, the kingdom, why is it, and maybe I'll start with you on this, Dr. Ottley, why is it that the church does not embrace, and by the way, for you that are watching me that are conservative evangelicals, I believe that this is a big reason why so many conservative evangelicals don't have more black support. For some reason, we are not consistent and strong on areas of social injustice and of injustice. It's like I could pull out the Bible right now from Micah to Jeremiah sitting where they sat to the New Testament to Romans. I can go all over the whole Bible and find that God is a God of justice. Yeah. So why is it that, for example, right, we will fight you as Christians over abortion? I mean, we will fight you because we believe in the sanctity of life. We believe that baby was, no matter how it got here, is from God. And we will fight, we'll march over abortion, but yet, after the baby's born, why don't we fight for that life once it's here? So, I mean, I'm saying this is me. Now, I'm somebody I'm more of a libertarian thinker, but I'm just saying, just watching all arguments involved, listen, I'm all for pro-life and all that, but I'm also, when I stand for you, I'm as pro-life as I am standing for someone not having an abortion. Because the weight of the kingdom, the message of the kingdom, is of a king and his kingdom exerting his force into a dark world. And within that kingdom, there's people of all different tribes, all different ethnicities and all that. But we're, in God's eyes, we're all the same. God doesn't view you any more or less. You were not created any less in the image of God based upon how you got here. Right? You were in the mind of God before your mom and dad ever busted a move on each other. Before Dr. Ottley ever called up moms and was like, hey, girl, what's your name? What's your sign? How you doing? Before that ever happened, he already had you in mind. And he knew how he would get you here. And so what I want us to speak about for a moment is how can we as the church of Jesus Christ, black church, white church, like you call Destination United Nations Church, like what are some things we can do to be better besides the things I preach all the time and what I'm doing right now, which is what I'm doing right now, for you that don't know, is I sit where they sat. It is a conversation so that people hear other people's experience, because when you're exposed to it, you have to at least begin to deal with it. Whether you accept it or agree with it or whatever, this is how we start to make change. I need to feel how you feel. I need to hurt when you hurt. That's what we're called to be as people. Yeah. And so how would you relate to that? How would you respond to the church's involvement? What can we be doing?
I'm glad you picked me first because this is his wheelhouse.
I know.
You know
he did the political thing on you, so I flipped.
Yeah, he gonna exegete this piece. You know what I mean? I'm gonna just sit over here a few seconds. But I think you're right, Pastor Coley, that it has to become part of our lifestyle. As a church, the church is not inclusive. We're inclusive in the practice of coming into the sanctuary, but we're not inclusive in the practice of what does it look like every day outside the church, right? And so if you in your house, which is the most intimate space that you occupy, it is very close to your heart. You just don't let anybody into the crib, right? You're just not inviting anybody over the house. But if you are inviting people over the house who don't look like you, who don't think like you or believe like you, practice like you, or even pray like you, that's how you get it, right? Because you could be exposed to something through the television and social media, right? But it doesn't pull on your heartstrings. Because as soon as you turn it off, you're going right back to your regular life. But you invite somebody over your house,
and they sit and they dine with you and they have dinner with you and they talk intimately about their lives, when they leave your house, their presence is still there. When you go to sleep at night, you're thinking about where they sat in your living room. And you're thinking about, let me check on them this week because they may be going through something that I can't even really think about because I'm not in their shoes. You've been exposed to them intimately because you've invited them in your house. You exegete that. I you know.
I love it, man. And there's so many. So let me say, there's so many layers to this. And for me, as a church practitioner, it's interesting that COVID shut everything down. Yeah. To me, I think first, COVID shuts everything down. That forces everybody, white, black, blue, polka dot, to see the church differently. Because now it's not about the building anymore. It's really about that space that you're talking about that you set up in your house. And people know, it's funny, people say, Pastor, I can't stay in my house. Oh, really? I wonder why you can't stay in your house. Because they got a whole lot going on. All right? And the idea is that the church is supposed to be taken everywhere, not the building, that we represent the church wherever we go. Now, that being said, there's a gap now with this newer generation on how they trust the church. They don't really, everybody doesn't see the church in the same light. They're like, if this is happening, why isn't the church speaking up more as an institution? Okay. So they're a little suspect. And this is black, white, blue young generation. Why are they not speaking up on behalf of these people who are being mistreated? Listen, you have young people now even wondering about their theology. Mm-hmm. It's like, if God is so good, why do these bad things keep happening?
I love those questions.
Young African American brothers and sisters,
hit me up,
especially young black brothers, are like, what's the point? Why did I come up in this church? It seems like the church ain't doing anything. We're still being slain in the streets. There's still violence everywhere. We're still struggling in education. What is the point of coming to this church when it seems like the church, not God, the church is not speaking in their language? That's the part of Acts. They're not hearing us. Remember, the quote from Martin Luther King says, rioting is the language of the unheard. All right? And I know people, of course, we're against looting. But on the protest, where did that stem from? It stems from people who feel like their concerns aren't being heard. And dare I even say a charge against the church, they feel like nobody's listening to them. Mm-hmm. So they now have to act out in other ways, watch this, to get attention. And for me, I'm at this wrestling now with how do I continue to speak a language, like we were talking about earlier, so that they understand that this Jesus talking about inclusivity includes you. He does care about what your struggle is. He does care that the unemployment rate in black communities is higher than everywhere else. He does care that it seems like the COVID death proportionally affected the black community and brown community more than anybody else, which opens the door to other problems we have with healthcare access. And for me, it's kind of a full circle and all these spokes of problems that are connected to one another. So right now, the church is fighting, how do we get this next generation to not give up on church as the institution? All right, because now I don't really need a building. I don't need church. I can read God all by myself. Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, this is kind of the double-edged sword with streaming. I don't got to come to see Pastor Coley in church. I don't go see Dr. Ottley in church. I can stream him for 10 minutes, take a break, and come back and watch him later. Yeah. So you now are dealing in a different time period for the church. And in the midst of all this other uprisings that's happening, where is the church on all this? How do we even grab their attention to come back to God? Because people are really wrestling with what's going on. They're wrestling, why would God allow COVID to happen? And why would he allow another killing to happen? So people are wrestling with their own theology right now. And that's why it's even harder as we try to reopen our buildings. People are like, what's the point of me coming back? What is the point?
Pastor, history is repeating itself because 100 years ago, we were in the Spanish influenza, right? The Spanish flu, which killed way more people than is killed now during COVID, right? And so the Spanish influenza lasted 2 years, right? But, the COVID shut everything down. The Spanish influenza shut things down for 2 weeks. And then people went right back because the economy was in need of work. And then everybody got sick. And so we've learned a little bit from that because we've been shut down longer than 2 weeks, right? But this idea of pandemics like COVID, it's not the first time that we've experienced that as a country.
One in 68.
And so
they did Woodstock anyway.
Right. We look at this like, is this the first time this is happening? No, it's not the first time. It's just being filmed.
right? The exposure is much larger. The exposure is much greater. People are chiming in. And we talked about this in the back a little bit too, Pastor. You know, people who are jumping on the bandwagon because it's so trendy, right? And maybe you have a question about that to ask.
My question for you guys to ask to help people, because I know we're getting short on time, that I think is crucial, and I'd like for you to speak to this, because you speak to this all the time at your work. There are a lot of people that's watching that aren't Black Americans, right? That are wondering not only what they can do, but like there are people that want to do more, or at least don't. There are some people that don't talk because they're scared to say the wrong thing, because you're getting attacked over all kinds of stuff right now on social media. So what do you tell people like that? Like for the Christians out there watching that really want to make a difference, like for me, it all starts in the home. Like I teach my kids certain things. I show them. We have a certain standard that we live by. Outside of that, which every Christian should be doing with all of their children and family, what would you say to that person watching that's like, I want to be better or do better? You know what I mean? Or I want to do more. What would you say?
To be part of the solution. That you just can't sit on the bench and just watch this next play. Like you got to be part of it, solution. Which if you're not, then you're part of the problem. Like you cannot be complicit. You just cannot watch things happening. You've got to now get in the game, right? And so I've got a bunch of white educators as a professor who we spend hours a day talking about how can we develop better lesson plans, how can we reach these students this way, right? So it's not just Black educators that I'm in concert with, it's white educators too, who are on the front line, who are protesting with Black people as well. You see it all on the media. It's not just Black people protesting, white people are down there too, right, getting busy. So I think it's important that if people want to get involved, you may have to connect yourself to somebody who is experiencing this and ask them the question, how can I help you? It's not about how can I help the cause necessarily, because the cause is much bigger than all of us, right? And you'll get consumed in the cause. How can I help you? What are you doing on a daily basis that I can contribute my talent, my gift, and my skills to help with this larger situation? So just get involved locally, right? Nationally, it's too consuming to try to take that on. Whatever city you live in, get involved in that city, right? So I think it starts with that, and I also think it starts with voting as well. I think we need more voters out who are voting locally. We are so concerned with who's going to be the next president. We're not looking at, well, what about the mayor in the city? You know, what about the sheriff? What about the chief of police? We got to start focusing on the local vote as opposed to this national vote.
Yeah, and I would add to that with that on that piece, just to let everyone know, because we're so consumed with this national vote, right? As if we wasn't watching videos when President Obama was in charge. That's what I'm saying. People don't realize. Well, I'm saying people believe a narrative that somehow this is something new. This ain't anything new. It's just being captured on camera. And not just that, I 100% agree with what you say. It's not about who we put necessarily in the White House. It's about we have to dig into the system even at the entry-level points. In our local governments, our local leaders. And you know what? A lot of you watching me that want to be a pastor, you probably might be called to be a politician. A lot of people are called to, all of us are called to infect the world. I don't care what position you're in. I don't care if you're a school teacher. I don't care if you're a janitor. I don't care we're called to take Jesus right where we go and infect our arena with it. Yeah. And when we start doing that effectively, my big problem is too many of us were good at doing church. We're not good at being saved. So, I mean, like, we're not good at doing what Jesus calls us to do. What do you say? Occupy till I come. Yeah. Don't care how he's coming, when he's coming, all that. You take over till I get there. Yes, and I think that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to educate those, and we're supposed to take over. And I think when we start to, you cannot change a systemic problem just at the top. You got to get in and start working the system. Yeah. That's just my opinion.
No, I'm with you. There's a quote that says that you're so heavenly minded, you're no earthly good, that, you know, some saints, they get saved, they say, I'm just going to hold on till Jesus come and not do nothing else. But like you said, we're supposed to make change in the world that we are in right now. And how does that change come? At all levels, in not just voting, all right, but being involved with what's going on. And here's the hardest part. Having that uncomfortable conversation that might not get you invited to the next family reunion, because you were willing to say you stood for something that might not be popular in the family, but you were on the right side, of history and willing to have and call something out. I saw this story, give me 1 minute. I saw the story of this little girl having a discussion with her father, talking about why Black Lives Matter. It was on Twitter, and she's arguing, passionately about why she should be able to say Black Lives Matter, and the father's like, it's not a big deal, leave it alone. And well, I say unfortunately, but probably necessarily, you need people to have these conversations about these issues that gonna make people a little squirmish. But until we're able to have them, we're probably gonna be back here again in 20 years or next year, because we weren't willing to have this conversation. And speaking to what you said, some couple asked me yesterday, what can I do? What can we do as a white people to try and help? I said, listen, support, but we got to be able to change policies at that local level. Who do you even know the sheriff's name? Do you know the chief of police? Is there a connection? Have we had sit downs and forums and tell them what's exactly on our minds so that we can all work together, watch this, to get policies in place, amen, that deal with, maybe police that get out of hand. What's the rule on this for chokeholds? You know what I'm saying? What happens? Is that in the training? So, there's so much we can do. But I think first is having those uncomfortable conversations about how we all can move forward.
Yeah. Well, guys, I'll tell you what, hopefully you've enjoyed this discussion. I certainly have. And, I think that I'd like to close out in prayer and pray for all of us and pray for our nation. And, I want to thank you guys for being a part of this discussion, for sharing your wisdom and allowing me to be your friend and in your life. I always tell people a man with an argument will always be at the mercy of a man with an experience. And I know Jason probably won't, Dr. Ottley, I'm sorry. Dr. Ottley won't mind me telling this story. When we were young, hopefully his mom's tuned off by now.
She might have logged out. Well,
Okay.
Go ahead and tell a story.
We were going to a summer league basketball game, and we were all piled into my little truck. And it was summertime, and in summertime, when you come from a multiracial family, you can get all different kinds of colors. And we had a blowout on the interstate. I was driving, and the truck tire exploded, my little bitty truck. We was ballers, though, my little $800 truck. And we got pulled over, and I didn't really know too much about how to change a tire. A little bit, I was going to figure it out, but I was nervous. I was on the side of the road, scared. Dr. Ottley and one of his friends called him Charles, big brother. And I was waving people down because I needed help. And I'll never forget this. Charles said, man, stop waving at people. I said, we need help. He said, they ain't fixing to help us. Now, whether or not someone will stop and help us or not wasn't the issue. It was that somewhere in his experience, he was like, folks ain't gonna stop and help someone that looks like me. And his words exactly were, you got all of us black people here, and you are all kind of brown. And that was, and again, this is just us talking, joking around. But as a young person, it impacted me. Because it was one of the first times until you experience it, it's almost like you don't think it's there. But when you see something like that became our truth, whether someone would have pulled over maybe and helped us eventually, I don't know. What wasn't the point? The point is that at least in his mind, for some people, it might even be dangerous to stop and help me. And this is the type of inequity that we've tried to bring to the surface today. To say that as a follower of Jesus, God's not cool with. And I just hope that our discussion helps someone. Know that our heart and desire here is to be God's people, to love all people, to bring us together, not to divide us. And hopefully there's been some education, and maybe you learned something new today. My prayer is that the grace and mercy of God will rest on each and every one of you that watch. Today, we just come together in the name of Jesus. And God, we just thank you that you are able to break generations of division, of hurt. God, you are a God, you said in your word, let justice run. Let it roll down. God, we're asking for you to help us be a people that fight like you did for those that feel marginalized and hurt. God, let us forgive each other. God, for the times maybe we should have spoke up and didn't, or whatever the past is, let us fight to make our nation, our churches, and our families a better place as we're going forward. We're asking that your kingdom would invade this world, that you would change hearts and lives. God, we pray that you put the right people in the right positions. And God, may those people who are in power, God, I pray even right now there's nothing too difficult for you. May you begin to change hearts and change minds. In Jesus' name we ask these things. Guys, thank you for being with us today. I want to thank Pastor Brown and Dr. Ottley for spending time with us at Destination today. I know we went longer than we normally do. Hope you stayed with us. Guys, don't hesitate to keep us in prayer. Send us, really, I'd like to hear some of your thoughts. I'm a big guy. I can take it. So don't hesitate to reach out. And this time we're called to bring healing. We're called to bring people together. Keep us in prayer as we're praying for you. Until next week, remember, 10 a.m. next week. Hope to see you back here at Destination. May God richly bless you. Have an amazing day.